Hello, and thank you for joining us, everyone. I am Bob Cohn. I will be your MC for today's webinar, and we've got a really great topic. We're going to cover how SpectraLogic and Veeam have come together to integrate and architect a dynamic solution for both backup and archive. If you have questions throughout the webinar, feel free to use your chat box and write those questions in. We'll try to allow enough time at the end for a little bit of Q&A, and we'll try to get all of those questions answered at the end of the webinar. We've only got about 30 minutes to do this, so let's just go ahead and kick it off. We have two speakers today from Veeam. We have Mr. Ron Martin, who is Solution Architect from the Veeam side, and from Spectra, we have VP of Product Management and Sales Engineering, Mr. David Feller. So, Ron, I think you're going to start us off. Are you there?
Indeed, I am. Thanks, Bob. We appreciate you having us on the call today. So, first on this, go ahead and advance the slides there, David. So, for those of you that may not be as familiar with Veeam and where we are as a company, I thought I would do just a quick overview of the business, and I promise not to go into excruciating detail on each and every number on the slide. I think it really suffices to say that we're growing our customer base rapidly. We're still in the range of multiple thousands of customers we're adding per month. In an industry segment, data protection, that is characterized by really low single-digit growth to even some of our competitors are actually contracting. We're growing in the range of 30%, year over year. So continuing to sell, lots of software, which makes us all happy internally. And one of the things we're even more happy about is the customers that are actually buying the software are pretty happy with it. So if you're not familiar with Net Promoter Score, it's an industry survey that customers are basically asked, would you recommend the solution in question, in this case Veeam, to your peers? And our Net Promoter Score has been increasing over time. It's currently put us in the range of some very well-known and well-loved, not just software, but even consumer brands, and it generally represents about roughly a 2.5 time increase over our peer companies as well. So we're happy about the revenue growth, the industry recognition, the analyst recognition. If you look at the Gartner, Ovum, IDC quadrants, we show up in the right quadrants there as well, and are expanding the solution rapidly. So with that, I think I'm going to flip it over to David.
Howdy, yeah, it's David from Spectra, and just a real quick introduction to Spectra. If you are not already familiar with us, we've been in the storage business for over 36 years, selling both tape and disk systems, including object store, NAS disk, for a long time, and we service pretty much every major company on the planet. We've been doing this a long time. We've got a very deep history with both our customer base and our partners, and today really the key is to talk about this partnership that Veeam and Spectra have to bring a high-end, highly available backup system to you. Spectra ends up being the storage vendor. We don't do backup software really of any kind, but we are the target. So we have both disk products, and we'll talk to you about those a little bit later, how we fit into the various Veeam workflows, as well as tape and some of the advantages of tape. And Ron, the advantages of Veeam.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you look at Veeam, actually, let's go ahead and advance to the next slide. Historically, Veeam, people looked at us and said, well, those are those virtual backup guys, and that was very well deserved and well earned. I mean, we still feel like we really pioneered virtual backups in a coherent way, and still believe that we do that really better than anyone. But we realize also that all of the workloads that exist on the planet are not necessarily virtualized. So we've been expanding the portfolio fairly dramatically over the last year in several ways. One, we now have agents. So if you have a physical Windows or Linux server that needs to benefit from the same backup and recovery capabilities that you're used to with Veeam, we can cover that as well. Or say you're running a non-Hyper-V, non-vSphere hypervisor, so you're running Xen or KVM or some other sort of hypervisor that we don't yet have native integration with, again, you can just lay our Veeam agent down on the OS workload itself and go at it. Or even if you're, maybe even running in public cloud, where you have, don't have necessarily have hypervisor layer access. Again, the Veeam agents are really excellent for those. We've also expanded into, non-VM workloads, if you want to think of it that way. So, again, the Office 365, for instance, has really taken off in the industry. I mean, we're seeing a lot of uptick on that. Microsoft is very, very happy about that, I'm sure. And we've actually introduced a product to let you do backup, do data protection for Exchange 365. Well, you may be asking, well, wait, doesn't Microsoft cover that? Isn't that already taken care of? Well, in a sense, it's true. I mean, Microsoft definitely takes care of the high availability, with the multiple data centers around the world, but they're not overtly a data protection solution. So if you, for instance, accidentally delete a user and you can't just go back to the normal recovery recycle bin to recover an email, if you need to recover an entire account, or if you need to recover other types of entities rather than just an individual email, you might want to have something in place like Veeam to allow you to do that. We're also keeping in lockstep with our customers as they move toward cloud. So if you've not been keeping up with the announcements from Veeam, you're going to see a lot of integration that we're doing on multiple fronts on multiple public clouds. And in addition, one of the things that you'll see coming, several things that you'll see coming up, is as we move toward just the exclusive VM backup guys, we're going to announce we're going to have several key capabilities coming in our V10 product. We've already announced. So, for instance, if you're an existing Spectra customer, you have a large NAS backups share. Well, right now, we really only back up what's encapsulated within the boundaries of a machine, either a virtual machine or a physical machine. So with V10, we'll be able to take your Verde, NAS share that you have, files, other types of data, and we'll be able to back that up natively. We'll also be able to natively, archive to, S3 and Swift storage. So it's been a very high demand, feature for our product for a really long time, is to be able to, hey, I want to move my older backups off onto object storage. So we'll be supporting that. We'll also be actually supporting the Nutanix Acropolis hypervisor. So we're adding another hypervisor into the core mix. And interestingly, we're also creating a capability within the vSphere VAIO framework to do continuous data protection. So if you're familiar with Veeam now, our backups for VMs are snapshot based. So we take a snapshot, back up the base, and then roll the snap back in. So with the VAIO framework with that vSphere offers, we'll actually be able to do continuous. So we'll be able to basically do real time, IO to keep that backup, that VM backed up in real time with the CDP approach that we're taking there. So anyway, just want to give you a quick level set on where we are, not just business wise but product wise. And now let's jump into the 3-2-1 rule. So if you've been around anybody at Veeam, it's really probably drilled into your head this notion of a 3-2-1 rule, and it's really a very simple notion. What we want is we don't want to just be your backup provider. We want to help you with resiliency. So with the 3-2-1 rule, it's pretty simple. Keep 3 different copies of your data, 3 different copies of your backup. Ideally on 2 different types of media, and we'll talk about some of the options there and what we specifically do with Spectra in just a bit, and one which is offsite. So in the case of obviously it's very relevant in this day and time where we're dealing with floods and hurricanes and all manner of natural disasters, and we definitely want one of those offsite. And there's actually an important corollary if you want to go to the next slide, David. So the other thing that we're increasingly seeing the very real need for is another one on the 3-2-1, and that is you need to keep a copy that's offline. And I wish it weren't the case, but the ransomware, to give, I guess it's credit. I don't know if it's credit. It should, maybe it's not. The ransomware manufacturers are getting a lot smarter. So they, a lot of the ransomware that we're seeing now, well, not a lot. Some of the ransomware we're seeing now directly targets, not just Veeam backups, but any manufacturer's data backup. So, for instance, we've seen variants of ransomware that go and look for VBK files, which is where we store we restore our backups. So for these cases, I mean, you need an air gap. You need an offline copy of your data to be absolutely safe in a ransomware world for sure. So let's go to the next slide, David. So how does this kind of flesh out? So in the kind of an overview architectural look, you have your Veeam backup and replication server, and you have some sort of primary backup storage connected to it, so that I keep my more, if you want to think of it, my hot backups on my primary backup storage. And then obviously I need to get something off site, so there's multiple ways you can do that. Maybe your company has distributed data centers, or you have maybe some sort of a dedicated DR site. Well, in that case, you could with Veeam, you can create a backup copy to make sure that the hot backups you have are copied and archived up onto maybe a secondary site or something that you could recover from in the case of disaster. Or maybe you're maybe looking more toward the cloud, taking advantage of one of our Veeam cloud service providers that offer storage and or compute up in the cloud, where that you could take the backups that are on site today, you could shuffle them off to cloud storage with a VCSP. And then we have a couple different options for that that second media kind of offline approach. One is what we call a drive rotation. So if you're not familiar with Veeam, we have this capability where we can create a repository that if you click a little checkbox and say this repo uses drive rotation, that maybe you have a large USB drive. You could plug that USB drive right into your Veeam server, say, for instance, and we can start dumping copies of the backups on there. And then if you plug in the week 2 USB drive, we're going to see, hey, what happened to the backup chain? It's gone. Well, since we're using drive rotation, we'll say, okay, we're just going to lay down a new full and then start increments from there. Or we've even had people that maybe you're trying to do things like maybe I've got an old server with a bunch of spare disk storage capacity. Maybe I can do things like, script that server to be online, during the backup copy window, and then, take itself offline, so it's, it's sort of on and offline. So there are a lot of different ways that you could potentially skin, different media offline. However, they're all kind of a DIY proposition. So if you want to do it cleanly, then really it's tape. Really, tape is what we recommend for both, that second media set and offline. So if we go and skip to the next slide, David. So then, in terms of how this looks in terms of overlaid with the Spectra product line, and again, the good news with Spectra is it's not just a point solution where it only would cover one portion of the 3-2-1 rule. We can really cover pretty well all the 3-2-1 rule with our integration that we do with Spectra, where we can keep the primary backups primary. Maybe if you have an offsite location, you could use definitely the built-in replication, or again, like I mentioned, you can use the native backup copy capability within Veeam to keep that there, or and then as far as offline and second media goes, back up to tape. The tape the integration that we have with Spectra is seamless. The other thing that I wanted to mention on this slide was there. In terms of, if you're not that familiar with Veeam, there are really a Swiss Army knife of restore options that are available to you here. In fact, we have a slide that has literally, it looks like the periodic table of the elements, and it has these 50 little boxes that display all of the different ways in which we support recovery from, just basic, hey, I deleted a file, I need to go grab this file off the backup, or, maybe I have an Exchange environment on site, I need to recover an Exchange mailbox or an Exchange email, or if I have SharePoint, I need to recover a SharePoint document or an entire SharePoint site, or maybe I have a database that's resident on one of my servers, and I need to recover a SQL table, or I need to recover a whole Oracle instance. I mean, we have a variety of ways to skin recovery, the short of recovering the entire server. Now, when you do need to recover the entire server, we actually have a bunch of different ways to cover that as well. So one of them is based on a technology that we call vPower. And what vPower really is, it's really just a fancy handle, I guess, for saying vPower is a way for us to present a compressed, deduplicated backup to your production hypervisor environment as a standard issue data store that can boot a VM. So why is that important? Well, say you have an instance where whether it's malware or whether it's human error or whether it's a bad patch or who knows what, you need to recover a large VM. Maybe it's multiple terabytes, and even in a very highly performant environment, maybe it take an hour or two to restore that VM from the backup storage to your production VM storage. Well, with vPower and what we call instant VM recovery, we're actually able to, with Veeam, present the stored backup image directly to the hypervisor as a VM in its native form, without actually essentially recovering anything. We're just representing it as a Veeam data store. So in this way, you can take that same VM, you can pretty well instantly boot it, be up in 5 or 10 minutes, and then if you're unable to recover the production VM, you simply do a storage migration to move the bits back to the production storage, over time. The other thing that this is interesting for, we think, is, well, there are really two things. One is, how do I know if my backups are even good, right? So we have a technology called Sure Backup, and what Sure Backup allows you to do is, using that underlying vPower instant VM recovery capability, I can boot up a whole stack of VMs. So maybe I want to test that I have a particular application that requires authentication, so maybe there's an AD component, there's maybe a database server component, database VM in there, there's maybe, some other application service VM, I got 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or however many VMs. I can actually boot those up off of my backup storage, again, with the vPower technology, into a network isolated part of your production environment. So assuming you have a few extra compute cycles and memory cycles, I can boot all of those all up onto my production environment and actually run some tests. I can schedule, which VM boots first. Did it boot? Can I ping it? Did VM tools come up? Did my database come up? If it's Active Directory, is my global catalog service running? If our out-of-the-box tools tests don't cover it, you can script your own. So that way I can not only, I'm not only taking backups, but I can determine which ones, determine if they're good. The other thing that this allows you to do is, say, worst case, you would be affected by some sort of malware or other type of infection and have to roll back to a prior backup. Well, how do you know which one, right? Because these infections can lie dormant for some period of time. So you can use the same technology to boot from different restore points and determine, hey, which one was the one that was clean, which one was the one that was pre-infection, and then I can restore to that copy. So again, we have a lot of different ways to skin this. And with that, I think I'm going to pass it back to David.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Ron. I think the next thing to take a look at is what are all these symbols on the screen, the green blocks and the tape libraries, and give you a little bit of a feel for what some of the storage options are underneath that accept as a target all these technologies that Ron has been talking about. So let's start with the green ones. So essentially what we have to offer, Spectra has to offer from a disk solution, is a very straight up NAS box that we call Verde. It's actually a very standard NAS product. We typically talk about it as a tier 2 NAS. This isn't a screaming fast IOPS kind of a box that you want to run, for instance, the American Airlines reservation database on. This is bulk storage. It's great as a backup target. It's great as just a general NAS for normal IT production work. And it comes in a variety of options. And there's some really interesting things here that are different than other products that you see out on the market. First of all, incredibly wide capacity range. It starts at about 48 terabytes in a 2U package, all the way up to roughly 7 petabytes in a single rack. It's one of the most dense systems available, but there's also a lot of flexibility. You'll see down here on the bottom, there's actually 3 different drive types that you can use within the same system. We'll talk about the actual system itself here in a minute, but we offer enterprise-grade SAS drives. We offer an archive drive option as well as flash, and you can actually mix and match these. Usually the best practice, of course, is to keep pools homogeneous. So it's very possible you want a relatively large archive system with a lot of these 8 terabyte drives. They actually are a very dense drive. We can fit a significant number of those. We'll show you this in a minute in a single rack. But we also offer full-on enterprise-grade SAS drives, as well as if you need significant IOPS for one portion of your business without having to buy 2 or 3 different systems, you just simply expand and set up pools as needed. So very, very flexible. And again, we talked about the 7 petabytes per rack. That's really with the archive drives. That's the most dense way to expand. So there's a single controller node, a master node, that's actually running an enterprise-grade ZFS system. So very unique here. Unlike most of the hardware RAID systems, you can actually go all the way up to a triple parity. So depending on how much protection that you want for your data, this is the most economical way to provide extra protection for sure with those different drive capabilities. The archive drives, the expansion node that we use for those SATA archive drives, you can actually fit 96 of those in a 4U chassis. So that's almost 800 terabytes per 4U. So very, very dense and very efficient way for large capacity storage. And the combination of the way that we're doing, a software controller, as well as this low-cost way to expand, this really is the most economical disk product, enterprise kind of a disk product on the market. We didn't list it here, but typical numbers as you get up into larger capacities is roughly 7 cents per gigabyte and below. So very economical, but very high performance and tied again directly into the Veeam system. On the tape side, you saw a representation of a variety of tape libraries. We chose one generic picture in all of those previous, but there is actually a wide variety of options for tape. This one's actually backwards. If you start on the right, it's the smallest of the units we offer in roughly a 4U going all the way up to about 1.5 petabytes, holding 50 cartridges. So you can actually import and export more than that. If you're doing a second copy, you can have a steady flow of tapes that get written and exported, so that's not necessarily a limit. It's just what you keep in the library, so a single robot that can access 50. These numbers actually are using the LTO-8 capacity, which you'll see launch here in just a couple months. And that's exciting because it, again, roughly doubles capacity over where we are today. So really exciting technology about to come. All the way up to, if you go to the far left, you'll see a picture of one of the, that's actually a smaller unit of our T-Finity. That one actually will go all the way up to 40 frames, so multiple robots. And interestingly enough, a single machine can hold upwards of 1.5 exabytes. Very, very dense, redundant robots, a lot of speed, and a huge amount of input-output for ejection and bringing tapes in. You can literally import and export hundreds of tapes at a time into that system. All of our libraries are transcalable. The basic concept is buy what you need now, but don't worry about it because most of the parts are interchangeable. You can very simply go from one unit to another with a program that we have. Very common that the robot, the power supplies, the controllers are actually common. We basically send new sheet metal and let you transcale it, is our code word there, from one unit to another. So a lot of flexibility as you grow, and growth can be determined in, if you're growing faster than the density, the areal density of whatever media that you're using. If you're going faster than waiting for LTO 8 and migrating to a new technology, then we can definitely help you from a library standpoint. And Ron mentioned it a minute ago, but there's a variety of reasons for tape. Cost is certainly one of those reasons. As you start to have a second copy, you eject it. There's really nothing more economical than tape. And we find in backup situations very, very frequently, you're rotating through so many different incrementals and fulls, and you're keeping enough copies that, you know, the amount of data that you save, you really have to be looking at what is the most economical way to save that volume of data. At the same time, it tends to be the lowest power option and the easiest thing to move offsite and actually take offline. So let's talk about the workflows in just a little bit more detail, and we'll come back to this offline concept and how you would actually apply it. So you saw this in a little simpler form in a couple of Ron slides, that Verde, the green NAS box, fits in a variety of different places, interfacing directly with the Veeam backup server as the primary archive, as the archive for the backup target. Veeam actually can handle multiple sites and have multiple NAS targets even replicated to a second site, with a incredible ability to schedule the various backups and move them between the two replicated sites. So there's a lot of capability there. We actually can do that ourselves as well. So we have a direct NAS to NAS replication capability, which some customers choose to use for a variety of reasons. So there's lots of options here. And Ron was talking about, there's a lot of flexibility in the way that you actually retrieve data. Turns out there's just as much flexibility in the architecture as well. So there's multiple links between the different products, and there's a lot of flexibility to let between my solutions architects and Ron's come in and help you really architect the best choice of those links and those replication targets. So a lot of experience between our two companies, and we'd really like to help apply that to the best use at each company. On the bottom you see Veeam has a direct link into our tape libraries. It is a very seamless interface. We'll show you here in a minute. There is one other option not shown on here. Our NAS boxes have the ability to drop a tape copy directly as a snapshot as well. So there's an incredible integration that we have, a lot of flexibility, all governed by a single interface from Veeam. As far as let's touch on ransomware just a little bit more. There's some interesting statistics that I'm not sure everybody's aware of. We talk about how common this is, but all jokes aside, it's a pandemic at this point. A recent survey, you can see the references down on the bottom, but a recent survey said 70% of executives were saying that they've paid at least $10,000 to ransomware hackers, and quite a few of them are up over $40,000. So it's very common. They're incredibly intelligent. They're getting very good at finding, what's the right amount to charge people, so that it's less trouble to pay than try to go through one of the other efforts. But with the right backup scheme and the right way to protect your data, that clearly is not necessary. So really, there's nothing else except for tape that provides a true offline. As Ron mentioned a minute ago, there's ways to rotate your disks. There's all kinds of options, but the tried and true method is to have something that's truly offline. Now, offline could be ejecting a second tape copy and literally putting it on a shelf next to the library, putting it in another library that's offline. There's all kinds of options, but as you know, there's great services out there, Iron Mountain and others, that will happily catalog your tapes, come pick them up for you, and be able to get them back. The only drawback to those services is they take time. So it depends on what your SLA is. How quickly do I need to retrieve something? If you need it very quickly, it's very simple to eject, have it sitting right there, and most of the systems will say, I'm trying to recover a VM or whatever it is, which specific tapes do I need to load back in? And that integration is really critical to you. So this is more than just making two copies. It's making two copies and being in complete control of your data. And that's what this partnership with Veeam really is all about. A seamless integration. And you can see that when you plug in a Spectra NAS system or a Spectra library, basically it just shows up in the Veeam system and becomes an integral part of the backup. We'll just show you real quick, there are a number of certifications for those of you that are concerned with these pieces. We're fully certified with Veeam on the Ready Archive and the Ready Tape. We're working on a little bit higher level one that Veeam came out with called the Ready Repository Layer. All the throughputs look good, and there's just paperwork to be assembled there. Last quick topic is, and we're not going to go into great detail, but there is a difference between archive and backup, and I think as an industry, we don't always do a great job of really nailing the difference and how this difference can actually be of beneficial value to companies. For a typical business, a significant portion of their data is very typically not transactional. It's data that has value, which we would call an archive, but it doesn't necessarily have to be put back as a transactional thing back into a single VM that runs immediately. That's absolutely business critical data, but there's plenty of other data that is truly just an archive. So essentially the concept is, if you can identify that, then there's lots of tools to be able to do that. Identify the transactional data, make sure that you've got a great Veeam system in place to identify the transactional data, and work on how do we apply the same 3-2-1 rule set to your archive data, but essentially take it out of the daily transactional system. So the goal there is make my backups faster. All the incrementals and the fulls are going to be significantly faster if I've got more data moved off into an archive system, and figure out how to mesh the two systems together. So there's lots of other things we'll talk about in the future. The goal here today, I think we've achieved, is to show you what this partnership is, the value that it can provide to you as a company, and very specifically how we work together. Spectra provides, as you can see, the affordable, simple, flexible storage options, both disk and tape. And Veeam has an incredible system that provides that high availability, as well as the long-term backup that you need, that is really great for our storage targets. Ron, closing thoughts?
Oh no, I think you covered it. No, that's great. I mean, yeah, we're definitely working together, and actually, David mentioned some things that I think we might be able to add to the list, and the ways of working together, like object storage, for instance. So yeah, all good stuff.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. And Bob, we'll turn it back over to you and see if there's any questions.
All right, outstanding job, guys. Thank you both. And we have had a couple of questions come in. Again, feel free to write those questions as they come to you if you still have one. The first one, and this came in kind of early, Ron, and I think it relates to you. It says, isn't Veeam Cloud Connect effectively an offline or air-gapped solution?
Pretty close. Yeah, so yeah, we do get that question a lot. It's like, well, it is online, and that's my hesitation. So the good news is, I mean, we do our own proprietary protocol, and it's fairly unlikely that a malware vendor would go to the trouble of cracking our proprietary protocol. But the truth is that it's still online. So I mean, if it's a case where there may be a credential compromise, yeah, no, I think it would still be vulnerable. So I mean, it's a good mitigation strategy, but I would not call it completely offline. I think we still need a very hard air gap backup there as well. So that's my opinion. So.
Gotcha. A couple of questions came in, Dave Feller, when you were talking about the Verde specifically. One was, can each Verde chassis be expanded, or do you need to add another chassis? So you talked about 10 chassis in a rack. Do you expand chassis by chassis, or can those individual chassis start small and grow large? I think is what they're asking.
Oh, you bet. So on the Verde side, essentially we use one master node, which runs the actual NAS share. That it's a software RAID system that's running ZFS, and then you expand with SAS connected JBOD. So if you're going for throughput, you are either going to add more stripes into a pool, or at some point add more master nodes. If you're going for capacity, essentially you use a single master node and you expand with a lot of SAS connected JBOD. So you can do either direction.
Okay, great. Those were the only 2 questions that we've had come in. Let me just make sure no more have come in while I was asking those. That's it. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, David. Thank you, Ron. We will be sending a copy of the presentation and a link to a recording of this presentation if you want to share it with coworkers or associates to each individual who is registered for the webinar today. And again, we appreciate your time and look forward to speaking with you in the future. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.